Welcome to the Sensitive Shift podcast. We're your hosts, Agat and Anna, and we're highly sensitive people who care deeply about prioritizing our mental health. Quick recap of last episode. We're back from our little break. And in our last two-parter episode, we explored the nuances of language and communication and how sensitivity plays an important role in these everyday processes. We also spoke about practical tips to express ourselves with sensitivity and with care. You'll remember from earlier episodes this season that we have mentioned that being highly sensitive is not a diagnosis, it is not a disadvantage, it is not a character flaw, it is really a neutral personality trait. We've said that we think that our society benefits from this diversity and functions best when we have variety, some higher and some lower, and some in between on the spectrum of sensitivity. We need our bold warriors just like we need our reflective advisors, and together we have balance and harmony. Though, of course, in our conversations on the pod, we are and will be focusing on what we know best: high sensitivity. In today's episode, we will explore the connections between high sensitivity and mental health, define and differentiate between mental health and mental illness. We'll also address the question of whether being highly sensitive increases our risk of suffering from poor mental health, mental illness, or both. And we'll cover our top tips to nourish, cultivate, and care for our mental health as HSPs. So last weekend, or maybe it was 2 weekends ago, most people in my life by now know that we're doing this podcast, but not everybody. So I was sharing that I am a co-host in this podcast. And of course, I started with the title being, this is the Sensitive Shift podcast that we're doing,
Naturally.
which isn't so, exactly, it's not so self-explanatory. So I had to add, in this podcast, what we talk about is this personality trait of being highly sensitive. And before I could finish my sentence, the person I was speaking with was like, "Oh, that's so cool. So I guess you help people to be less sensitive." Actually. And I'm so glad that they did respond authentically in this way, because it really, I think, showed me, oh, that means that the work that we're doing here is really needed and really valuable, I think.
Yeah.
And I emphasized to this person in that conversation, and I want to share today to just start us off in this conversation with this framework that says, we are not here to help people be less sensitive. We don't think sensitivity is a problem. It's not something we need to fix. We do not need to be less of anything. And I hope that in our podcast and in our episode and throughout the season, our listeners really feel that they can be exactly who they are, wherever they find themselves on the spectrum. And in our case, that's high.
Yes. You know, I really like that you're sharing this story, Anna, because it also reminds me of my journaling process from the past year, especially. And you and I talk a lot about journaling because we both believe in that process and in how writing really helps us with introspection and awareness. I've done a lot of therapy and a lot of work in therapy in my life, and becoming a therapist myself has also helped me understand many concepts and processes from a knowledge perspective, and then eventually it led to feeling more attuned and aligned when looking at that triad that we really emphasize a lot in therapy, which are thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And recently I decided to work on the self-forgiving journey through journaling a lot and writing as a next step for understanding myself and fully accepting and loving myself, which I felt was somewhere or something I had always worked on, but maybe the work I had done was kind of setting me up for me to be able to do that fully now. And part of that exploration was realizing that, and I think that happens a lot in the clinical space too, with clients, for example, that I used to think growing and healing and moving forward meant I would eventually feel less, think less, stress less, react less. So it kind of touches back on what you were explaining earlier. And I think for a long time that was my goal, actually. I don't know how many times I probably showed up in therapy and saying, like, I wish I didn't feel so much. It's so, it hurts so bad when it hurts.
Mm,
But when it's happy, it's so happy, right? Um,
yeah.
but then I realized with my sensitivity and accepting my high sensitivity that I probably will never feel less. And I also realized I probably also don't want to feel less anymore. I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to feel deeply. And although it sucks when it really sucks when it sucks.
Mm,
um, I don't think it's a bad thing to care. And I also thought that would mean I would react less, think less, be less in my head. But then I realized that that shouldn't be the goal. And that eventually the goal was to reframe so that instead of less being the goal, that the goal should be different. Because less, and that is also doing a little nudge to our previous episode on language, less
mm-hmm.
implies that it was too much to begin with. But
Right.
different means that I can treat myself with kindness when I feel deeply or when my thoughts are racing. It's more about accepting my sensitivity and looking at things differently, knowing that I have changed or that I have decided to, or not decided because it was a work. It was work. It wasn't something that I just woke up one day and was like, oh, well, now I decided I want to think differently about myself.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
and I think that's going to be well talked
Mm.
about today. But it was about that entire work of reframing. And instead of hating myself to change, I decided to reframed all of these things around feeling deeply and reacting deeply or strongly, I should say, when it came to my sensitivity and my history, rather than combat it.
Wow, I feel so seen.
Oh, well, I'm so glad.
Yeah,
Mm,
I relate to that
yeah.
so, so much. And
Mm.
something that I was thinking of is we just talked about language last time. And what is it called? The study of language, like the
Psycho.
etiology of the, like
Yeah.
the word, and the opposite of less is full.
Hmm.
Like instead of
Or more.
careless, you have
Yeah.
careful. Instead of
Uh-huh. Right.
soulless, you have soulful. So
Mm.
I feel like instead of less, if we frame that as full, that makes me feel good.
Yeah. You're full of great and you're full of soul.
I love that.
Yeah.
Just before we press record on this episode, I guess you were describing to me the terms and just helping us to get on the same page for today's conversation. And you defined some terms like mental health versus mental illness. And I thought that would actually be a great place for us to start because in the conversation today, we are going to be talking about these terms. I would like to invite you to give us a bit of a breakdown of what is the difference between mental health, mental illness. Can we
Mhm.
have both at the same time or not? Do we
Mm.
only exist in one or the other? So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I'm so glad we are because I think these two terms, so mental health and mental illness, sometimes can be confusing because people might think that they are interchangeable when in fact they are not. So the best way that we can define those two is really to also, and we will make this parallel as after, is also to look at physical wellness, right? So if we talk about physical health and then a physical illness, so we'll make this parallel a little later. But when we come to mental health versus mental illness, let's think about it on a dual continuum. So that means we have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. So let's see that on our vertical axis, we go from good mental health at the top of our axis and bad mental health at the bottom of our axis. And this axis is crossed in the middle by our horizontal axis with mental illness on the left side to no mental illness on the other side. So you have these two continuums that intersect at the middle. So when we talk about mental health, we talk about something that all of us have. 5 out of 5 people will have mental. This is something that we all have, and this is something that we all have to take care of in different ways. Mental illness is characterized by alterations in thinking, mood, or behavior that are associated with significant distress and impaired functioning. So, we're really going to see here symptoms that last in time and that impact our daily ability to function over a significant amount of time.
Would it be okay to think about mental health on one spectrum as like on the one side, optimal, great mental health, and on the other side, mental illness, just one line? Would that be
Mhm.
accurate, or does it need the nuance of the dual continuum?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does need the nuance of the two axes, the two continuums, because mental illness is different than mental health. It's not the same continuum. And somebody can place on having poor mental health, and that can be localized in time, such as experiencing a breakup or stress at work, for example, which definitely affects your mental health, but doesn't necessarily qualifies you as meeting criteria for a mental illness, which will be much more severe in symptomatology and in the time and effect that that has on your daily functioning. That doesn't mean that the breakup is not affecting you, and that doesn't mean that you may not show up or present some symptom that could be overlapping with a mental illness. Life is challenging, so all of us will at some point eventually fluctuate on the mental health continuum or spectrum, whereas mental illness, we won't all fall in that continuum. I think another point to emphasize is that you can fall on the continuum of mental illness, which means you could be diagnosed with a mental illness, you could live with a mental illness, and still rank pretty high on having good mental health, which means
Hmm,
that, yes, it could be surprising, but
interesting.
it could mean that you have learned how to live with your mental illness, that you know how to manage symptoms, and that you have in place good network, good support system, and good coping strategies or mechanism. So you can live optimally with a mental illness, and that doesn't mean you won't experience challenges. Uh, and you can also live with poor mental health and no mental illness. So these are very interesting nuances to look at, but they're important because we can all do things to increase our mental health for optimal mental health. However, mental illness, you'll probably need more often more professional support, such as going to therapy or maybe sometimes medication if that's what you wish or that's what is more optimal for you. Does that help?
Absolutely, that helps. And what I'm feeling from that is also, or what I'm thinking about that is also the idea that if someone listening is saying, I don't have a mental health or a mental illness that's been diagnosed, and also I'm struggling,
Mm-hmm.
that's possible and you deserve support. And likewise, someone who does have a diagnosis of a mental illness can also hear that and have this message of hope that we can still have quite a high functioning, good mental health and live with a mental illness at the same time. So there's hope on both, all four ends of the spectrum, I guess, because we have the dual continuum.
Mm-hmm.
So in all quadrants, there can
Mm-hmm.
be hope and positive messaging here.
Yes. Exactly. And I'll go back to this analogy of physical health because sometimes it's easier to illustrate the point. But
Mm.
for example, we all have health, right? We're
Yep.
living human bodies. So if we look at the continuum of health versus illness, we could look at the analogy of catching a common cold as experiencing a localized, a circumstantial mental health problem, just like a cold would be a localized circumstantial health problem. That doesn't mean you're not going to treat the cold, right? You're going
Mhm.
to rest. You might take a sick day. You might take some medication over the counter. You might go see a doctor. It depends how severe it is. It depends if you need more support. So you're going to take care of it. You're not just going to say, oh, whatever, right? So
I don't
it's
have this diagnosis, so that means I
right.
don't need anything.
Yeah.
Right.
You still need to care for it and
Yeah.
rest. Your body is still telling you, like, oh, maybe we need to slow down or something is not quite right now.
Mm.
But it is different than having an illness such as cancer or diabetes, something that stays with you over time that you need to treat, that you need support with, and you need care, long time care, and um, a larger support network for treatment. So this is where the analogy is helpful because we're going to look at it similarly when it comes to mental health versus mental illness. You might
Mm.
experience a challenge like we all will because life is difficult, but we also have a natural resilience to get through most of life's daily challenges or stressors.
Mm.
But then because we're complex beings, some of them might evolve into something more complicated. And then some of us might be more prone to developing a mental illness. And that's where we need to treat it like we would treat a physical illness with more care, more support, and over time. And that's where a lot of the difference will come is that an illness will be more pervasive over time and symptoms than a mental health problem. But that doesn't mean that the problem doesn't need support or attention.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Good point. And I think this leads very well to think about the intersection between mental health, mental illness, and being a highly sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what the research suggests or what you think about this question. Are HSPs, or is being highly sensitive, does this make us more prone or more vulnerable to having mental health challenges, be it poor mental health or be it mental illness?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was the main question we were asking ourselves when we wanted to do this episode or
Mhm.
researching this episode, and it's a very interesting one, and we'll go back to childhood and Elaine Aron doing a lot of that research as well because she really speaks about how a lot of it for highly sensitive children will, or a lot of the explanation will come from the childhood of highly sensitive children. And so there is a growing body of research showing that sensitive children have a biological sensitivity to context that allows them to derive more than other children from supportive and enriching environment, but they're also more sensitive to negative environment. So that's where, linking back even to our second episode when we were talking about childhood and attachment, and we were talking about how if a highly sensitive child is experiencing a difficult, maybe even some trauma in their childhood, it can be much difficult for them to develop a good relationship to their own trait. And so they are more likely to develop certain mental illnesses and mental health conditions later on in life. So it's more about the ground or the foundation that's laid. And it's about thinking in adulthood about how this child then develops into adulthood and the acceptance or resistance to the trait as well, which can become very adaptive if we work with our trait and we're feeling good about our trait and we know how we work, how our body works, how our nervous system is working. We might be experiencing a lot more of the positive effect of being highly sensitive than if we are resistant to the trait. And that's where a lot of the negative parts of the trait, such as being overwhelmed, overstimulated, the high empathy that also makes us more prone to taking on other people's emotions,
Right.
can develop into like rumination and poor coping skills or mechanisms. And so that's where we can see that the trait then doesn't become very adaptive when we grow into adulthood. So I would say that it's a lot about looking at our childhood, and the messages that we received around our sensitivity will determine or can be a big factor. Maybe I would add more nuance there, a big factor into how our mental health can develop.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like what we're saying is that in positive, nurturing, supportive environments, HSPs are very much likely to thrive and take in all those positive cues. And
Mm-hmm.
equally, on the other side, in the face of certain more difficult events or negative experiences, that those
Mm-hmm.
also hit deeper
Right.
and uh, mean that there's more vulnerability. And it's really context dependent, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. So then on the negative side, it would be that then we would be more prone to burnout, anxiety, depression. But then on the positive side, it means that we're more likely to respond positively to psychotherapy, to positive environment that reinforce and empower us to reframe our experiences, to use our trait in a way that's adaptive.
I think I remember reading um, in Elaine Aron's book something about sensitive children being able to notice social cues that
Mm.
mean encouragement or that mean acceptance, are also able to pick up on those subtleties as well. So they're picking up the positive, just like, yes, the negative as well, but there's not a hyperfixation on the negative. Are there any other overlaps between sensitivity and the field of psychology?
Yes.
I knew the answer was going to be yes.
I think everything else kind of touches on that, but one of the first thing that is quite literally in the essence of the trait is the study of personality, since sensitivity, or high sensitivity, I should say, is a personality trait. The big and common conversation in the study of personality is looking at the big five, or the 5-factor model of personality, which groups 5 unique characteristics to study personality, and each of them have assigned sub values to qualify that spectrum under which one would fall for each of these traits. So these 5 unique characteristics that make up the big five are also known as the acronym OCEAN, because it stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And what's interesting for us as HSPs is to notice, research, and understand if having the high sensitivity trait consistently impact how we may identify on the other characteristic or on these characteristics. So we know, for example, that a majority of HSPs, about 70%, identify as more introverted than extroverted on that continuum. And you and I were just talking about this, Anna, before we were recording, but I was wondering if part of that high number is because we need more of this recharge time and we need more of this quiet, more reserved alone time because of the overstimulation. So I wonder if it's almost like a causation effect here where we almost tend to go towards more of the introverted marker because of the makeup of being highly sensitive. So that's one
Mm-hmm.
of the questions that I have that I would love to explore a bit more. And I also have a question around the correlation with the neuroticism trait. And by definition, neuroticism is the tendency to experience negative emotions such as fear, sadness, stress, worry, anger, and the tendency to respond worse to stressors. And even
Mm-hmm.
we have a quick arousal when stimulated and slow relaxation of arousal from negative emotions, particularly.
Yeah, we see where this is going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
see where it sounds like a lot of it could overlap greatly with high sensitivity, but this is very much focused on negative aspects
Right.
of the trait. And so with these particular parameters, there could be a good reason to wonder about the interpretation of HSP placement on that scale when the trait is marked by overarousal and deep affect, although to all types of stimuli, so both negative and positive. And same would go for agreeableness and the high empathy element for HSP. So would an HSP score higher on the scale for that reason? And then is the relationship correlation or causation? And what's also interesting is how does this change over time?
Right.
Because even the trait of HSP, I think, fluctuates with time, with learning. I definitely don't identify the same as an HSP. I don't feel the same in my sensitivity as I did 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
as I do today, as I even did last year, as I might in 10 years. So, what does that mean about the study of personality in itself? For a lot of people who are listening, a big question, and a question that we've had for ourselves too, is it important? Pretty sure we will know the answer to that. Is it important for HSPs, and also why, to care for
Yeah.
their mental health? And do we have any guidance for how to do that?
Oh, yes. Yes, and yes, we do. And I think it's been trending, and especially in organizations and work culture, to talk about mental health and taking care of our mental health. And this is everywhere. And there's a million meditation apps and all kinds of wellness trends and
Mm,
wellness culture. So, of course, we know intuitively that we need to take care of our mental health. And also, I find it's not always obvious how to make this really relevant to the individual. Or I'll say, I didn't always know how to make it relevant to me. What can I
mm,
get from this culture that is actually going to make a difference? And what's something that I'm doing because I think I should, and
mm,
I might need to actually be doing something more for me.
mhm,
And for me, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, when I had that famous conversation with my therapist where she was like, I think you're an HSP. Do you know what that means? And I was like, no, I don't. And she was like, okay, well, here are these resources. I want you to learn about it. And in those weeks and months that followed, I reframed taking care of myself from the perspective of being an HSP. And for
Mm.
me, that made all the difference.
Yeah, and can I add something
Yeah,
before we dive into
of
this?
course.
Because I think you're saying something so important when it comes to, you know, trends and what's popular and what we see. And in a world where we're so connected, we see so many people talking about this, and there's something beautiful about it in the sense that we're
Mm,
breaking some stigma, and it's something that is just normal now to say, like, I need to take care of myself. It's not
yeah.
weird to say that anymore. But there's also something that can feel almost privileged, that can feel dismissive when it's trendy, because then it might feel like it needs to look a certain way, or it needs to look very materialistic, because what we see online is often things that people can afford. They're not necessarily more, because it's hard to show something that's about our inner process. Just I just think it's a nice thing to add, to just explain that taking care of ourselves looks like so many different things, and that a lot
Mm,
of the conversation can, unfortunately today, make people feel like this is such a privileged conversation. And yes, I think sometimes it really is. And I think there's other ways everyone should be able to take care of themselves and their mental health. And there are ways
mm,
that we can do that, that don't require you to spend $200 on XYZ, or that
yeah.
don't that don't look it don't they don't feel luxurious, they don't look luxurious or fancy.
Yes.
They are about developing your inner being and your well-being, and that often looks
Yeah.
messy.
Um,
So, just a note.
yeah, I think that makes me think of something that really stood out to me in the beginning of that work about caring for my HSP was a conversation about the environment that I'm in. And at the time, that would be my home or my apartment. And one feeling so validated by the
Mm,
idea and the notion that, okay, HSPs are deeply affected by their environment and they tend to prefer certain environments. So, in my case, that's clean environments
mhm,
or
mhm.
free from clutter. So, I don't like to see too many things all in the same place. And one would think that taking care of my mental health in part could be, well, keeping my place clean. And that's what I thought it was going to be. And I was surprised when one of the instructions that I was given in one of our conversations was to let some of the
Mm,
clutter stay there.
yes.
And I was like, wait, we're trying to take care of me by leaving the mess there?
Yeah. You know
Yeah.
what this is about? This is about understanding, because a lot of this also comes from a place of wanting some sense of control and some sense of
Right.
reducing our anxiety. And so reducing our anxiety for us is about, like, augmenting that sense of certainty, but we can't do that all the time because life is
Mm,
very uncertain, right? So
yeah.
then what we do is increase our tolerance for uncertainty.
Exactly.
And so doing distress tolerance is actually adaptive in that it doesn't mean we need to make our place a mess all the time, but it's actually just helping us understand that we may be in different places where we don't have control of what
Right.
the mess level is going to be like. And for that not to send our world and our nervous system through the roof, then
Mm,
we can practice those distress tolerance skills so that we can remain at a optimal or functioning level of wellness.
Right.
or not feel too disrupted or distressed or distraught by the what is going on. That doesn't mean at some point you can't, like, you need to leave if this is getting too much, and that might be itself a distress tolerance skill,
Mm,
right? But like, I feel you.
you get it.
Yeah, the other day there was somebody at my place and they washed their hands, and then by the time they found the towel to dry their hands, there was water everywhere on the floor. And I don't mind when this is happening at somebody else's place, but when it was my place, like, I felt myself being like, "Oh my goodness, there's water everywhere. Oh no." And it sounds ridiculous,
Mm,
but I was just like, "Oh no, I need to clean now." And then I was like, "I get no one's gonna die. It's just a bit of water. It's okay." So then what I like my distress tolerance has been working on
yeah.
using a lot of humor and like laughing a little bit about this part of my trade, which is to be
Mm,
like, it's fine. Like, thought that, like, that reminded
yeah.
me of that when you were talking. And I was
Yeah.
like, but at that person's place, I wouldn't have had any problem with that happening, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of it too. I left my dishes in the sink after breakfast once this week, and I was
Yeah.
so proud of myself.
Look at us.
The moment we've all been waiting for. The tips about what we can do as HSPs to cultivate and to take care of our mental health. I think this is going to be different for each person. So I'm just going to
Mhm.
speak from 3 ideas to get us thinking about it.
Yeah.
And the first one is about cultivating emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is how we perceive, express, and regulate our emotions. And I think because as HSPs, we do have the E in our handy dandy does acronym is for empathy. It is about our emotions. And so, really being able to perceive, understand, regulate, name our
Mm.
emotions, sit with our emotions is a skill that helped me so, so, so much.
Mhm. Yeah. And when we accept and recognize that our emotions are not our enemy, our relationship with ourselves and our mental health can significantly improve.
And it's like one thing to say that, it's another thing to
Yes.
feel that and experience that. And actually, for me, one of the most, I would say, at least recently, painful emotions or negative emotions that I've experienced is this feeling of grief.
Mm.
And I know in my life, something that I think I can now say affected my mental health for some time was avoiding the feeling of grief. And I avoided, oh my gosh, in so many ways, right? I
Mm.
had many different ways of keeping myself busy and happy,
Mm.
doing enjoyable things, dancing and moving and socializing and studying and learning and all of these things to avoid this feeling. And I have recently, well, actually, not that recently, but relatively compared to how old I am, discovered meditation. And specifically, there's a grief meditation
Mm.
that I must have listened to, I don't know, at least 30 or 40 times.
Mm.
And I never really gave myself permission to in the past. I thought this is something that we get over, or this is something that we, you know, get through as quickly as we can to keep living. I didn't realize, it sounds so silly, but I didn't realize we were supposed to feel.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was grief is meant to be felt
Mhm.
until I actually sat down and carved out time to just like literally sit with it.
Yeah. Grief is a very hard one.
Mm, yeah.
Very, very hard
Yeah.
Mm. I'm really proud of you for finding that space and that permission,
Mm.
because that is very difficult to do. And it is much easier to try to find other ways to cope than one of them being actually sitting with it and holding it in our hands and looking at it and saying, I see you, actually, and you're trying to tell me something, and I'm going to take care of it.
Yeah. And when we can sit with our own emotions, then we can sit with other people's emotions.
Yes.
And our connection with other people, our relationships, the connection that we feel can deepen as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these can be so rewarding and I think so positive for our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. So we're summarizing. It sounded like tip was going to be a short, cute, and sweet thing. And in the end,
Mental health. It's never short and cute.
it was. Yeah. So tip number 1 was about emotional intelligence, cultivating emotional intelligence, and being able to sit with, recognize, or I should say, not even being able to, but practicing.
Yeah.
Because it's not a check I can or I can't. It's not a yes or no kind of thing, opt in or opt out. It's
Right.
we practice. And the second one, okay, this one might be a little bit lighter. But this one is about improving our sleep habits. There's a lot of research that looks at the connection between sleep and mental health. And we know that they're highly correlated.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that while we sleep, literally our brain is recovering from the day. And while we sleep, we are allowing our nervous system to rest and to recharge.
Mm-hmm. And it's about like valuing sleep, as sleep is important. Sleep is crucial to
Yeah.
our ability to function, and even more so as HSP, with the depth of processing that we do every day. Like the ability to feel rested and recharged when we wake up is itself a luxury because it's
Yes.
just so much going on. So valuing sleep and everything that goes around sleep to help us be able to do that is really important.
Yeah. And I'll add to that on a personal note, I find that my sleep improved when my ability to sit with my emotions
Mm. Mm-hmm.
improved. And so for me, although I can absolutely understand that for some people it might be really some of the physical aspects of the evening routine that really help, or carving out time, that's totally valid and definitely part of it. And also sometimes we may be doing all those things and it still
Mm-hmm.
feels really difficult to fall asleep.
Yeah.
I do think there's a
Yeah.
connection between those two, or there can be.
I love that. It's about,
Mm.
there's so many things that affect our sleep that are not just things that you do right before, right after, or
Exactly.
not just the quality of your mattress, although we know that that
Oh, that is so,
oh no, we opened the can of worms.
just to say,
I just
yeah,
changed my mattress, that's why.
yes.
Yeah.
And the third and final tip that we'll leave you with is the idea of embracing our internal experience. And I'm going to say more about that.
Yeah.
So it's either through somatic movement or with meditation, but the idea of turning inwards
Mhm.
and building attunement and awareness about our internal experience. So I'm just going to define somatic movement for a second.
Mhm.
because it is movement, like it sounds like. And the word somatic in front of that really just means that it's movement that is focusing on the internal experience of moving our body versus the external appearance. So what is this move going to look like?
Mhm.
Or the end result. So the end result being maybe I'm moving because I have pain, and when I move, it relieves the pain. That's the end result.
Mhm.
And it can be very freeing for when we're in our head, or we feel like we're in our head too much, or if we feel overwhelmed. Because when we feel deeply, we need to and we can really benefit from using our body, from externalizing the movement. And I know, Agathe, that this is your area of
Mhm.
expertise. This is what you do. So
Yeah.
please feel free to jump in here.
Well, it's just a very lovely crossover between the creative arts and mental health and then sensitivity here. Um, it's a beautiful way and helpful way to work with anxiety, with any experiences of trauma, because these disorders are often characterized by rumination and complex, difficult, negative cognitive biases and processes. And so when you can't see us right now, obviously, but this is very much of a something that happens from the shoulder up. So that means it's a lot happening in our heads, but we forget that it our whole body is coming with us in our lives. So our experiences of anxiety and our experiences of trauma, our whole body went through those experiences as well. So allowing for room for our whole bodies to heal, to give our head quite literally a break can be groundbreaking for many people. So that's a lot of the work that we're able to do in creative arts therapies work. And of course, I just want to add the caveat here that this can be very difficult work. And for a lot of people, it feels quite unsafe to be in their bodies, which is why we stay in our head because that's much safer.
Mm.
So this tip really and all of these tips are really for you to adapt in doing this for what works for you at the place where you're hearing this, or doing it with support, so with a therapist. That would be highly suggested as well.
Mm.
That would be my contribution here.
Yeah.
And I know that both of us engage in those practices, and you are a superstar.
Check out one of our IG stories where you can see us doing that.
Oh my. Oh my.
But we did a little somatic movement before our pod today.
Yeah. Alrighty, we're moving into our fun segment. We're doing another Would You Rather. And keep in mind that for this Would You Rather rapid fire questions, we're taking a mental health, self
Spin.
care spin on it, but it is quite lighthearted and we try to make it relatively fun. So please take that into account and understand that we're not saying that this is what self-care looks like at all time, and that that's what should work for you as well. All righty. Anna,
Yes.
DIY spa day or professional massage?
Professional massage.
Yeah. Although we have killer DIY spa day.
I mean, we do both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's because I do it so much.
Yeah,
Then now
that's
I'm
true.
like, oh, a change would be nice, actually.
Yeah.
Is this a free professional massage? Because if so,
Yeah, right.
I get. Would you rather receive a surprise care package filled with all the little self care goodies or a therapy session with an adorable animal by your side?
100% therapy session with an adorable animal by his side. 100%.
Of
Would that
course.
be your choice too,
Of
Anna?
course. Like biased in the way I asked the question.
We're so biased. Yeah. I mean, I love therapy and I love animals, so of
Mhm.
course. Would you rather have a playlist of uplifting songs or a collection of inspirational quotes?
A playlist. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
a
that's
music
what I was gonna
girly.
say for you.
Last but not least, would you rather have a pet therapy unicorn to cuddle with whenever you feel down or talking plants that give you encouraging pep talks?
I love these questions. I mean, who wouldn't want a unicorn?
Mm,
I want a unicorn, but I also have so many plants that if they could talk, I would like that too. So that one is I'm gonna go neutral on this one.
both.
Yeah. All right. And how did you or how will you nurture your sensitivity this week for HSP minute?
Ooh. This week, well, I should say last week and also this upcoming week, maybe actually the next 2 weeks are super busy. My calendar is
Mhm.
really, really, really busy. And I think with that in mind, what I'm going to do is remind myself that I have permission to say no.
Mhm. Taking care of our busy lives. I was going to say something quite similar as well. Like the past few weeks have been quite busy. I'm doing a lot of things in my personal life, like personal professional. It's intersecting a lot.
Mm,
And so I went from having a job and then a lot of open time and so I could schedule my recharge time quite easily. And now I'm struggling with having that recharge time and that recharge time being a lot of time on my own. But I've had to be very intentional. And that mixed with the fact that having to be that intentional means that I have to let people know that I'm going to say no to this plan today because I need that time on my own. And that conflicts a lot with the part of my sensitivity that's the empathy or the agreeableness that I want to please other people and I want to have fun. And it's it's a difficult place to be in where I don't want to be misunderstood. I also don't want to not be invited the next time. So it's it's a hard place to be when you know that, oh, okay, like I know I have to be careful because I don't want to go towards burnout. And at the same time, doing all these things makes my heart happy. But if I do too much and I don't rest or I don't have time on my own in my own space with no clutter, no other people there, nothing.
the tolerance for clutters.
Yeah, exactly. Then I know that I'm going to become more frustrated or irritated or irritable, I should say. And that is going to come out on these same people that I want to be with and that I want to spend great time with. And I don't want that. So it's been a lot of like soft conversation to choose the spaces where I can go and then the spaces where I can say no and all that to also complete all the things that I've put on my plate
Mm,
in my busy life as well. But all good things. It's just finding that balance. So yeah, it's
lovely.
interesting.
We'll check back in with each other and see how we navigated.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay tuned. Did we make it?
A final disclaimer that we are discussing contents related to personal wellness, not advice. We, of course, acknowledge that each experience is different, and if you're looking for a specific support, then you may want to consider one on one professional help that's individualized to you. Thank you again for listening, hanging in with us in this journey of discovery. And stay tuned for next episode, which will be on HSPs and relationships. Woo! Thank you. Bye.